Welcome to episode 25 of the Ascendancy podcast. I'm Austin.
And I'm Chris.
On today's episode, we're going to be talking about thought experiments, specifically vegan hypotheticals. And the point of this episode is to share some interesting hypotheticals that spark introspective thought into the vegan and animal liberation moral imperative. As a vegan listener, you can incorporate some of these into your arguments or vegan activism style, and this can potentially help with your engagement with non-vegans. And as a non-vegan listener, you can listen to hear some unique hypotheticals that morally challenge your current way of living. And the first one, and this isn't something that I've personally used so much in activism, but more so something that I've thought about myself on a personal basis, especially when I was new to being vegan, is the alien hypothetical. And humans have supreme power over non-human animals, and this has empowered humans to dominate, exploit, and slaughter them for their intrinsic benefit. So, say there's a hyper-intelligent alien species who is much more powerful than humans, and they came onto Earth and they looked at our framework, our way that we treat animals, and they adopted the same for themselves and decided to treat us exactly how we treat animals, using our logic. And if they were to do that, of course, we would then know what it would be like to be exploited, slaughtered, dominated, mutilated in just such heinous and horrific ways as the human race does to animals regularly. And when I think about this, it's such an abstraction, but I want you as a listener to really put yourself in that place. Imagine there's a species who's vastly more technologically advanced than you, vastly more intelligent than you, and they've created systems to readily and easily enslave and consume you. What that would be like, what it would feel like to be enslaved by them. You would be surrounded by technologies, materials, systems that are completely foreign to you, completely foreign to your understanding, and your entire will and life would be stripped from you. You'd be treated as a commodity. That's exactly what humans do to animals, creating an artificial enslaved existence that they have to experience. And that's what our logic entails if it were hypothetically adopted by beings who would be in a position relative to us as we are to animals. So please really reflect on that. This is a very morally serious subject, and I think when we view it from the animal's perspective by, proposing a hypothetical species who's in that position to us, we can really more readily understand what we do to the animals. And in the same way that animals cannot defend themselves from you, from us as a species, we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves from these aliens' might. So would you accept your own subjugation, enslavement, and slaughter by an alien species? Of course not. And one thing that I've seen some people react to this hypothetical with is saying, oh, well, we would fight the aliens, or we would, use nuclear weapons, or we do everything we can to survive. That's not the way the hypothetical works. Animals don't have any capacity or ability to fight us off or defend themselves or protect us. And in the same way, we wouldn't be able to do the same to a hyper-advanced alien species. We would be completely at their mercy. So why would you want to have a domination or a slave ethical framework when you could potentially be the one on the receiving end of that ethical framework? And one of the key takeaways from this thought experiment is that the value of a being is not derived from their strength, intelligence, or utility. It derives from subjectivity, and this is a capacity to experience the world from within. So if you reject alien domination over you, you implicitly reject the domination of animals by humans And if you accept alien domination, you void your own claim to moral protection. So the only non hypocritical way to engage with this hypothetical is to be uniformly against domination and slavery and exploitation. So your framework, must be universal. Either domination is ethical entirely, including human slavery, including humans being consumed, or it's unethical. You can't really pick and choose who it's okay to enslave without any trait you name being used to justify the same being done onto you. So there's no third path. Either domination logic is acceptable or unacceptable. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Austin, for kicking us off in this episode. I think this is a really powerful hypothetical, and you explained it well because it's so easy for people to justify being non-vegan and exploiting animals because they're in a position where they're not the victim. They're not the one under the fist of domination by a higher power. So when we enslave and slaughter trillions of animals per year, it's easy to say, oh, well, it is what it is. It's just, we're more powerful than them, we're smarter, or what have you. But if you look at it when this alien and hypothetical lens, if when the roles are reversed and we become the victims of oppression and we are not powerful enough to defend ourselves against a hyper intelligent alien species who wanted to come and harvest the earth for materials or harvest human species for our organs or our skin or our flesh, the same way we do to animals, suddenly it doesn't look so great when your logic is being used against you. So it's entirely hypocritical, like you said, to have this domination logic be okay in one direction, but when you're the victim, hypothetically, it's not okay. Then that's just a blatant contradiction, and it's just hypocritical. And it's a powerful hypothetical because it puts people in that hot seat where they could imagine themselves, for example, like War of the Worlds, like that really classic alien movie where these, intelligent aliens come down to Earth and realistically, in the same way animals can't defend themselves against us, hyper intelligent alien species, we wouldn't be able to attack them or harm them in any way. We as humans, we feel like we have so much might with our weapons, with our nukes, with our long range missiles, but this alien species, to keep it hypothetical consistent with the context that we have with our relationship with animals, the aliens would be able to easily render these offensive tactics useless. They would not be able to harm them whatsoever. So yeah, this hypothetical is interesting, and I have used it here and there in my activism because sometimes people just have no ability to empathize or think of themselves in an animal's position. Because I guess on one hand you can see like animals are similar to us in the ways that matter, but on the surface level to someone they could seem very different and seem very strange, like they can't put themselves in their position. But the alien hypothetical, you just imagine yourself as you are, and then you imagine a higher power alien species, that we've kind of seen in movies, we've seen in culture. It's not as hard to maybe imagine an alien species coming to Earth and having that power over you the way you have it over animals. So I think this is a good hypothetical, and it really can spark some introspective thought. So going on to our second hypothetical today, thought experiment, it's going to be the John Rawls veil of ignorance idea. So if you don't know, John Rawls was a 20th century American philosopher, most known for his veil of ignorance concept, which was published in his 1971 book, A Theory of Justice. And much of his work focused on thinking about what a fair and just society should look like. So, to explain the veil of ignorance idea, it's a thought experiment where you imagine yourself before you're born and you imagine designing a society not knowing who you will be born into it as. So you won't know what your sex, race, class, talents, or social status will be. So behind this veil of ignorance, rational, good faith thinkers will choose principles of justice and try to create a society that is fair to everyone. Because if you choose to construct a society that basically unfairly benefits having certain qualities, you would be disadvantaged at best or brutally oppressed at worst if you did not possess such qualities when you're born. So, an example is if you were to construct a society where uh, Russian men, for example, have certain privileges and more power over everyone else. If you were born into the human species as not a Russian man, then you would be disadvantaged through no fault of your own. It's just that the society is going to be benefiting that one, trait, that one kind of class of people. So if you think about it this way, it's a good way to think about how to create a society that's fair for everybody. Because when you're born, you obviously don't choose where you're born, your sex, your race, uh, what religion you might have, or when it comes to like your family, the religion they pass on. So it follows from this idea that basic rights and liberties at a baseline should be granted to all members of society. So these include fundamental rights such as the right to life, the right to bodily autonomy, but also higher order rights like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to a fair trial, etc. So, extending the idea further with the theme of today's episode and looking at it through a vegan lens, let's also posit that you would not know what species you're born as when you come into being on Earth. In the original veil of ignorance idea, it was a given that you be born human, of the species Homo sapiens. But in today's episode, we can extend this idea further and posit that you may be born non-human. So how should we design society with that in mind? Should it be designed the way society is today, with animals having virtually no protection under the law, no fundamental rights whatsoever, and living under the fist of human domination and enslavement? Every single year, humanity destroys trillions, and I said trillions, of animals for food, clothing, entertainment, for obsolete medical testing, and for other reasons. The list goes on. So if our current society is just good to be left as is, it could be you that's born into agricultural slavery or to be exploited and destroyed by humans in, whatever way that they see fit. That wouldn't be so great, would it? So it's easy to defend animal exploitation as a non-vegan, human benefiting from the exploitation, but the tables turn severely when the roles are reversed and you are suddenly that victim of that, society where you don't have those protections, you don't have those rights. Because if you don't know what species you're born as, you could be born a pig on a feedlot, you could be born a fish in an aqua farm, just kind of trapped in this small space, just not able to live the life that you naturally will want to live. You'd be born into a medical facility to be tested on, and it just wouldn't be fun, right? So everyone just thinks about everything from a human perspective, but it's interesting to think about what if you were born non-human? How should society be? So with this veil of ignorance concept, it's really clear to see that the society we have as it is today is unjust in its treatment toward animals. It's unfair, it's discriminatory, and these animals we share the planet with, we really need to think about better ways to be interacting with them, and that's what we're trying to create as vegans, as vegan activists. We cannot change society or reconstruct it from the ground up, now that we're already born into society. But it's still up to vegans and vegan activists to shift society towards one that is more just for all sentient beings. And, lastly, if you're a non-vegan still listening into this episode, I hope you realize the errors of your ways and you recognize your complicity in this unjust system and you make that change to become vegan. Austin, what do you think about the veil of ignorance concept as I explained it here?
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful hypothetical, and I think it really has a place when people view humanness as a distinction itself to exploit and dominate animals. So when they say, like, okay, well, it's acceptable for me to prey on animals because I'm a human, I'm the superior species, that's when it really comes into play. Because no being on Earth chose what species they're born as. A cow didn't choose to be a cow. A chicken didn't choose to be a chicken. And whoever, is watching this, you didn't choose to be what you are, a human or a male or a female or whatever you are. And it would be like this. Let's say you view yourself as superior because you're a human, and that superiority somehow deems it acceptable to prey on others who lack this attribute. Well, let's say I view superiority, I view the superior race and sex as being an Italian American man. So therefore, if you're not an Italian American man, I can enslave, dominate, and literally consume you as you do to animals. You would quickly realize that is an extremely arbitrary and predatory worldview, right? I would imagine so. None of the animals that humans prey on chose to be an animal, so why not treat them with the same respect that you would want to be treated, in respect to me claiming that because I'm an Italian American man, I'm the superior species. It's very, at face value, absurd. Secondarily, it assumes that superiority is also a valid means for preying on others. If you want to think that you're superior because you're human, okay, that's fine. But how does superiority, or thinking that you are better or greater than an animal, which is subjective, by the way, create a logical basis for dominating and preying on them? Like, let's say you think that you're superior because you're smart. Well, chances are you don't have an IQ of 180. So is it okay for someone with an IQ of 180 to enslave and eat you? Probably not. So the entire notion of superiority creating a pathway or justification for enslaving others, I think itself is flawed logic. That brings me to the next hypothetical, and this is a difference reversal hypothetical. And I was inspired in this line of thinking by Ask Yourself with his Name the Trait. Now, I don't 100% fully endorse the debate bro style of activism, but these are people who are in a space who are continually, consistently sharpening the sword, sharpening their arguments, and it's something that I think there's value in learning from. So imagine each and every trait difference that is used to differentiate animals from humans. So intelligence, sapience, language, ability, or social contract as an excuse to exploit, dominate, and consume them. And these are the common differences that humans use for exploiting animals. Let's take intelligence, for example. Virtually all animals' intellect falls somewhere on a continuum between a newborn human and a toddler. At what intellect level does it become morally acceptable to prey on a being? At the point at which it does, it becomes equally acceptable to do the same to an equally intelligent human. So imagine this, let's say it's morally acceptable to prey on animals because they're less intelligent than people, and you take the intelligence of a pig, for example, right? Well, the pig is around as smart as a 3-year-old human. So if you use intelligence as this trait, it follows that, okay, well then it's acceptable to prey on every baby and infant between 0 and 3 years old, if it's acceptable to prey on the pig. Or you take language. Well, all of these animals communicate at a higher and more complex level than a human baby. So then it goes back to, okay, well, it's acceptable to prey on human babies as a result of this logic. So whatever trait that a person chooses for exploiting animals, they then subject a huge amount of innocent humans to the same. And this is because the argumentation used for non-veganism is inherently flawed. And I've engaged in thousands of debates on the subject, And I've never seen a compelling difference used to justify treating animals one way and humans another way, specifically the systematic exploitation, domination, slaughter, and consumption of them, but not doing the same to humans. And you can even take, let's say, someone wants to try to sidestep at this and they go to humanness, being a human itself. That takes us back to the Ilian hypothetical and also Rawls' veil of ignorance. So there's just not a good logical differentiation between humans and animals that justifies preying on one and not the other. So to use any of these lines of reasoning is inherently contradictory and hypocritical. In other words, it's a bad argument. And that said, there is actually one trait, one specific trait that does unite and it does create a strong ethical foundation, and that is sentience. And that is a being's ability to have a unique perspective of reality. And every animal that people consume and prey on is a sentient being. They all have a unique capacity to experience reality. And sentience is essentially the foundation of veganism, of non exploitation, because if there is something that's not sentient, they don't have a subjective experience of reality, there isn't a moral patient. For example, every animal has the potential to want to survive, to want to live, to want to avoid being dominated or want to avoid being preyed on by another. But if something is non-sentient, i.e. a chair, plant, mushroom, etc., they don't have an inherent desire that can be infringed on. So sentience is the most foundational attribute that a being can possess to preclude them from being exploited. And also, when a human chooses any of these arbitrary characteristics, whether it's intelligence or species or sapience, they always open the door to themselves being dominated as a result of their own logic. Someone could use species as a differentiator. Someone else could use race as a differentiator and prey on, a person based on their race using the same sort of classification. So there's no logically consistent, valid moral way to have a domination framework. The domination framework always becomes hypocritical, and veganism is the consistent and logical antidote, counterpoint to that framework. And one thing to note, just in general activism and outreach, why I don't use name the trait as Ask Yourself does, is I think it's a little bit convoluted, a little bit complex. Like, most people have zero background in moral philosophy, and it really goes over their head. Like, when you ask someone, how is it morally acceptable to exploit an animal that's traits equalized to humans, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about. So when I actually use this hypothetical, use this thought experiment, I just ask people, how do you think animals are different from humans that justifies preying on them but not humans? And this sort of gives people a canvas. They can sort of, fill in the space with whatever they genuinely think is the case. It doesn't have to be specifically a trait, just any difference, because they must think on some level that animals are different from people in some way that makes it acceptable to prey on them. And I don't want to limit their options or ask them in a way that could potentially confuse them, because I want to have a genuine dialogue with them, where we're both seeking the truth and coming to this conclusion, that it is wrong to exploit animals. I want to have a genuine conversation where they fully understand what I'm asking them. So I just simplify it to what's the difference, between humans and animals. And Chris, what are your thoughts on this hypothetical in general?
Yeah, I think you explained it well, and it's very powerful because I think it underlines the true moral quality, the true trait that derives our moral consideration when it comes to morality. It's sentience, like you said. So when people cite these characteristics like intelligence, sapience, social construct, the ability to speak a language, we don't value humans based on any of these traits. So it all breaks apart when people try to invoke them to justify exploiting other species of this planet. Fundamentally, sentience is the trait that deserves, moral recognition, moral protection, because they have intrinsic wants and needs. They prefer to live. They don't want to be property. They don't want to be exploited by the hands of another. So when you look at, human morality, we don't value humans based on, like I said, their intelligence or their ability. We just look at sentience. It's the same reason we value, human toddlers who have a very low ability to construct, to benefit society. They don't have ability to have social contracts. And even if you were to strip away a baby from the family, who would be harmed if the baby was harmed, we still would value, a human baby that we found on the street, hypothetically, with no ties to, any human family. It's because we value the subjective experience, that toddler, that baby has. They don't have high IQ. They don't have, social contract ability, like I said, but we value them because they have that sentience. And that, if you strip it all down, that's what we value. So this hypothetical really shows we should be protecting animals. We should be giving them their basic rights because they are sentient just as much as, even the most vulnerable, humans in our society. So it's really powerful, like, hypothetical. I think you explained it well. This kind of like marginal cases, role reversal hypothetical is powerful, and I agree with you. Ask Yourself has done a good job, formalizing name the trait. He turned it into like a whole syllogism, and it involves a little bit of formal logic. So, like you said, it'll fly over people's heads if you read off the name the trait flowchart as he has it written. I like to use this in a more natural language sense when I'm talking with people on the street or talking with people online about veganism. So yeah, I think this one's a really good one to incorporate, and I think you explained it well. So rounding out the episode, we do want to address, a common counter argument to, invoking hypothetical argument when it comes to, vegan activism or vegan messaging, is that some people will say hypotheticals are unrealistic, they won't ever happen. So your argument is moot point. You're just invoking like fantasy fairy tales, so I can just ignore your hypothetical style argument. So what we have to say to this is that it's a disingenuous point because hypotheticals are used all the time in rhetoric, in literature, in argument styles to make points, to show the boundaries of one's moral views or the consequences of one's moral views. And anyone who says this all their life, they interact with or propose hypotheticals all the time and have no problem at all with them. So some examples can be like, just a simple example is like sports. Like people will say all the time, like, oh, what would, the NFL or the NBA be like now if this player didn't get hurt in this game? They think about other hypotheticals like, if this political candidate, wasn't assassinated, what would, the landscape of this country be like today? I can think on and on. Like people interact with hypotheticals all the time that, it didn't happen that way, but it's still like interesting to engage with because we can think about what, could happen. And those are retrospective hypotheticals, but we can also think about things that haven't happened yet in the future to think about, what could be the ramifications of that. And we don't just swipe it away. I think when it comes to this, it's just like when a vegan is presenting a strong argument to them, using hypothetical style argument, it's a convenient way to just kind of swipe it aside or to dodge it because and to engage with it in good faith, it'll put them in a corner where their moral arguments are being shown as being truly insane. truly crazy. You know, for example, if someone valuing intelligence as the justification to exploit animals, then it logically follows from that that if you find humans with equal intelligence to the average animal, that it will be okay to exploit and enslave them for food. Like obviously that's insane. So in order they try to dodge it to get away from the horrible moral consequences of their worldview. Um, but that's why it's so effective, because it exposes the insanity of their worldview. But suddenly it's, you know, unrealistic, or just a moot point when it's making a strong case. So another thing I want to say is we've all interacted with the trolley problem. So if you're not familiar with it, it's a hypothetical where you imagine a train is going down a track, and if you don't interact with the train at all, it's going to go down and it's going to kill five people uh, who are like glued to the tracks, like they can't get off. But if you were to, you know, pull a lever, it would divert the train to another track where it would kill one person. So you've probably encountered this in your high school philosophy class or college philosophy class, you know, any, you know, moral education course. It's a very common hypothetical that kind of helps people like figure out where they sit when it comes to moral evaluation of a certain scenario. So we don't shun this hypothetical just because like, oh, it'll never happen. I'll never be walking down the street and there'll be a train coming and I have the option to pull the lever to save five people, to save four people. We interact with it because it has value, it has utility, it's making a point, it's helping to elucidate where we stand, you know, morally in certain scenarios. Um, so yeah, those are some things I have to say to the people that try to say hypotheticals are pointless, unrealistic. So I'm not going to engage with it. Do you have anything else to add, Austin, here?
No, absolutely. Hypotheticals allow us to engage with logic, ideas, theories in a way that makes them more readily understood. So when we use a hypothetical, we're entertaining what a person is saying, we're hearing out their arguments, and we're allowing them to see other potential ramifications of their ideas. So they're an extremely useful and helpful tool. We don't need to engage with hypotheticals, but they can potentially help people draw conclusions from their logic. And I would say if someone is against hypotheticals and they don't want to entertain them, that's a sign that they're trying to evade or dodge their logic or moral views being questioned and tested for consistency. So essentially, they're not confident in their worldview, in their logic, and they don't want you to demonstrate how it's potentially false. That's the real reason why people don't want their hypothetical tested. Like for me, with my worldviews, with veganism, I am 100% open to hypotheticals. Let's test them. Let's see where they go. Let's explore the logic. I think that if someone genuinely seeks a high level of understanding, not only do they engage with hypotheticals, but they use them themselves as well to stress test their positions in life. And one thing I think, if a non-vegan is viewing this, and one potential counter argument that they could have to the positions that we had in this podcast is that they could potentially claim that we're making a false equivalence fallacy, or that animals aren't equal to humans. And this, of course, you know, is to say that we're making a logical fallacy or an error. And I want to clarify that veganism isn't the position that humans and animals are equal, but that the traits that they do possess, such as sentience, deem them worthy of fundamental moral protection from being exploited by moral agents. And I think the concept of equality itself is a falsehood. I mean, equality only exists in mathematics and logic and law. I'm not claiming that any two people or any two beings or any two animals are equivalent. But I am making the point that they are sentient, and sentience alone should preclude them from being preyed on and exploited. So, for example, when people say that humans are equal under law because we understand that the arbitrary differences and potentially non arbitrary differences among humans don't constitute a grounds to prey on them or harm them or exploit them. And that's what we ask when it comes to the treatment of animals as well. Not to claim that animals are equal to humans in the traits that we potentially value as humans or that we value or pride in ourselves, but that they are equal in their capacity for sentience and thus deserve the absolute minimal moral foundational ethical treatment, which is veganism, which is to not exploit, dominate, and prey on them. So with that, I want to say thank you for viewing. We appreciate it if you made it this far into our video. Please share your thoughts on these hypotheticals. What are some other hypotheticals that you've seen that have opened your eyes into thinking critically about this subject? If you're non-vegan, please feel free to ask us any questions that you have about veganism or going vegan. We're here to help. So thank you for viewing our episode. Peace.
Thank you. Peace out.